Cedric the Grand wasn't born into a world of comfort. His empire, the vast kingdom of Valis, stretched from the icy northern fjords to the burning southern plains. But he didn't inherit this dominion on a silver platter. He had to carve it out with blood and fire. By the time he was 14, most boys his age were still learning to swing a sword. Cedric, however, was preparing to command armies and outmaneuver traitors. His father, King Eldric IV, died suddenly, some say, by accident. Others suspect foul play falling down a marble staircase in the Palace of Dawnspire. With his death, the throne of Valis hung in the balance. Opportunistic dukes, rival kings, and ambitious generals all thought a teenage prince would be easy to crush. They were wrong. Cedric's rise began with his most loyal mentor and guardian, Lord Beric Thornhelma, war-hardened noble with a mind like a steel trap. Beric wasted no time. He gathered loyalists, rallied troops, and led Cedric into one of the bloodiest battles the continent had ever seen, the Battle of Red Veil Fields. On the opposite side stood General Hadron Voss, a brilliant commander with decades of experience, who had declared himself rightful ruler of Valis. But in war, experience means nothing when fate puts an arrow through your eye, and that's exactly what happened. Hadron's death sent his army spiraling into chaos, and Cedric, barely a teenager, usurped the throne by drenching Red Veil in blood. But that was just the beginning. Ruling Valis wasn't like conquering a city. The kingdom was a patchwork quilt of fiefdoms, languages, and faiths. While Cedric and his court followed the sacred path, most of his subjects clung to the old waste pagan rites, forest spirits, sun cults. He knew forcing unity through violence would only breed revolt. That's when he turned to a far more effective weapon than swords: marriage, and not just one marriage. Over the years, Cedric would marry again and again, each time binding a noble house to his cause. Some marriages brought him gold. Others brought him land, soldiers, or political leverage. Eventually, his court would whisper that his harem was so vast it could form its own city, but Cedric wasn't chasing pleasure. He was engineering power. From the ashes of a crumbling kingdom. He was building a dynasty. Cedric didn't just expand his empire by raising banners and charging into battle. Red drew the map of Valis by choosing who to place a ring on. His first royal match was arranged long before he wore a crown. At just 9 years old, he was married to Lady Alira Thornhelm, a noble from the same bloodline as his own. She was a cousin and a descendant of the ancient Valdran kings, tying him to the founding mythos of the realm and securing the loyalty of the powerful Thornhelm family. It wasn't a marriage of love, but of legacy. 11 years later, as the borders of Valis trembled under the weight of rebellion, Cedric made the most pivotal alliance of his reign. He wed Princess Seraphine Avalar, the fiery daughter of High Lord Bramwyn of Ambergoyne. The Avalars had long resisted the throne, boasting elite cavalry and command over the key mountain pass of Derwyn. Instead of waging war against them, Cedric folded them into the royal house. The result: the Avalar knights rode under Cedric's banner from then on, and Seraphine, fierce and cunning, became far more than a political bride. Other nobles followed the same path, offering daughters instead of declarations of war. Within the next 6 years, Cedric married women from the eastern duchy of Wexmoor and the coastal fortress town of Storm Harbor. Each bride came with dowries of land, ships, soldiers, and loyalty. By the time he entered his 30s, Cedric's realm had tripled in size, not by conquest alone, but by conquest sealed in silk and vows. In 1573 of the Valian calendar, after his victorious campaign in the merchant-rich city of Greyhaven, Cedric took Lady Isolde Verena as wife. She was the niece of the defeated merchant prince, and her dowry included the key sea routes through the Bay of Thorns. The marriage was part celebration, part declaration of dominance. For 15 days, the capital of Dawnspire overflowed with feasts, coins hurled into the streets, and gifts that sparkled like the stars, jewel-encrusted belts, war horses clad in silver, and ivory-fanged mastiffs sent by desert kings. Each union was more than matrimony, it was strategy. And not all of them came peacefully. When Cedric's armies crushed the rebellious provinces of Dunmere and Calgarn, the surviving lords weren't given a choice. Those who wished to keep their titles bent the knee and sent their daughters to his court. For many noble families, it was better to have a daughter in Cedric's harem than a head on a pike. The daughters, in turn, became living contract symbols that peace had been signed in blood and bound by bone. After the highlands of Northmere were subdued, Cedric took Lady Eveline from the conquered clan as his 7th consort, and following his annexation of the far western glades of Leorwyn, he accepted Princess Annika as part of the peace accord. These weren't just women in silk, they were hostages in brocade, royal reminders to their fathers and brothers that defiance had a cost, but Cedric's ambition stretched beyond Valis. In a symbolic gesture that stunned the Western world, he later married a noble woman descended from the legendary conqueror, Targon the Red of the Old North, a move that tied his bloodline to one of the oldest dynasties in known history and reminded every rival that Cedric wasn't merely a king, he was a force of legacy, empire, and calculated power. What looked like romance from afar was a battlefield behind palace walls, and the battlefield was only just beginning. To an outsider king, Cedric's ever-expanding harem might have looked like the indulgence of a lustful monarch, but to anyone who understood the inner workings of the court, every woman brought into his palace was another piece on the chessboard. And often these pieces came at the cost of bloodshed when Cedric crushed the rebellion of the Greyhearts in the western reaches of Dunmere. The terms of surrender weren't gold or titles, they were daughters. The noble house offered Lady Thalia Greyheart, a striking figure with glacial eyes, to seal their submission. Her presence in the harem wasn't just symbolic, it was a warning to every noble watching. Even the proudest bloodlines could be bound in silk and made to bow. This pattern repeated itself again and again after his conquest of Rothwyn Keep and the fortified valleys of Kenler. Cedric received 2 more noble women into his circle, Lady Brielle of Kenler and Lady Yvain of Rothwyn. Both came from lines that once defied him with blades. Now, their place was in the Velvet Wing, the name whispered among palace servants for the secluded garden palace where the king's women lived. Some saw it as a prison. Others saw it as the most powerful chamber in the realm. When the frost covered peaks of Wintermere fell to Cedric's legions, Princess Alawen of the Frostborn was brought south. She was not just a noble, she was royalty in her own right. Her presence in Cedric's harem marked the complete submission of a kingdom that had stood independent for 3 centuries. Some said she held her chin higher than the rest. Others whispered that she had plotted to poison him on their wedding night. But whether myth or truth, she remained in Dawnspire under constant watch and constant intrigue. But not all additions to the harem were political losses, and one of his rare diplomatic victories without bloodshed. Cedric negotiated peace with the rival kingdom of Therendale. As part of the terms, he married Lady Celestia Princess with northern blood and eastern gold, descended from the line of Eldon the Flamewalker. Her arrival was hailed as a joining of empires. Behind closed doors, it was seen as a truce born from exhaustion, one Cedric knew wouldn't last. Over the years, his harem came to resemble a council as much as a collection of companions. Some women were bound to him by treaty, others by conquest, and a few by whispers of affection. Together, they formed a web of allegiance that spanned every region of Valis and beyond. Yet life inside the Velvet Wing was anything but peaceful. Every woman there knew that her value was tied to power, who she was, what she brought, and most of all, whether she bore Cedric a child. A son meant security, elevation, perhaps even rule. A daughter was still useful, but less so. And if a woman failed to bear either, she risked being forgotten, or worse, displaced by another, hungrier, noble bride waiting to claim favor. Despite what outsiders believed, the harem wasn't a sanctuary. It was a battlefield where the blades were words, and alliances were forged over midnight wine and veiled threats. Cedric may have won wars in armor, but the war within his own palace walls had only just begun. The halls of the Velvet Wing were quiet but never calm. With more than 500 concubines and nearly 4 dozen wives residing in King Cedric's royal harem, power wasn't just measured in bloodlines or beauty. It was survival. And in this hidden kingdom within the palace walls, survival depended on influence, cunning, and proximity to the king's heart. At the center of this tangled hierarchy stood Queen Alira Thornhome, the king's first wife. Though she never bore Cedric a son, her position remained unshaken. Why? Because she wasn't just the queen consort, she was his oldest confidant, the daughter of a noble house nearly as old as the throne itself. She had been by his side since childhood, knew his fears and ambitions, and more importantly, she had the court's ear. Ministers deferred to her. The king listened to her in private council. And when other women tried to rise, they often found themselves mysteriously isolated, their allies gone cold. Then came the night when Cedric collapsed in the Hall of Lanterns. Word spread that he would not last the week. Alaric, finally stepping from shadow to throne room, took charge of the court. His first acts were swift, guards were reassigned, visitors barred, and the Velvet Wing sealed. He promised peace, but everyone knew the storm had arrived. In his final hours, Cedric asked only for silence. He refused priests and healers alike. He summoned no council, issued no decree. He simply stared out the stained glass of his chamber, watching the setting sun bleed across the marble floor. And when he died, the bells of Dawnspire rang not in joy, but with the heavy toll of uncertainty. Alaric was crowned under gray skies and thunder. Within days, he ordered the royal doctrine of Veritas Lux to be dismantled. The sacred path was reinstated as the state religion. Foreign philosophers were expelled. Temples of mixed faiths were shuttered. The concubines of the Velvet Wing were either married off, exiled, or locked away in cloisters. Alaric's rule would be sharp, clear, and merciless. Cedric's dream of a unified, tolerant, spiritually diverse phallus faded like incense in winter wind. And yet, despite the rollback of reforms, despite the shadow now cast over the palace, Cedric's legacy endured. He had rewritten the kingdom's map without conquering every inch. He had brought centuries-old enemies to his table, not through fear, but through family. And he had proven for a time that kings could rule not just with swords, but with minds, and in dusty halls of learning, and in quiet hearts across the land, his memory remained.